All right. Are we ready to go? Okay. I got it on. Airplay it? No. I think I can.
The two little bars. GCA mid-aisle.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And this is being recorded. So just to let you know, we're going to be using, and you guys can see me, and everything's fine at the tech booth, right? Yep. Okay. All right, so thanks for joining us this evening. We have a large crowd, and so we'll be able to take all of your questions at the end. Just want to go through the agenda for tonight. Just talk to you first about why we're here for a couple minutes. I think most of you do know, but we'll give you a little more information. We'll be also providing a general overview of ALICE and talking about age-appropriate ways that we're going to be rolling this out. We have our school administrators that are here and talking about each of the schools roll out for different age-appropriate students in our district. And then we'll ask if you have any questions, and we'll try to answer your questions. So that is the agenda for the evening. Everybody okay with that? All right, so why are we here? Obviously, Columbine and Sandy Hook are two of many, unfortunately, school shooting events in American life over the last 25 years, but there's also been a lot of other public sector school, or I should say shootings that have happened as well in the public sector. So what we're actually talking to you about tonight with ALICE can be applied to other facets of your life. And there's a lot of examples where you can go into a supermarket or any other public place that you go into and teach your children some really important things about how to look around, how to be aware of what's going on, not to be afraid, but just be, you know, where are the exits? How could I get out of here quickly? Those are things that we'll talk to you about. So what we're talking about are not things that just apply to schools, but apply to any public place that you and your family may go into. The vast majority of incidents, and this is why we're here, vast majority of incidents, and our officers will talk about this in a few minutes, occur within 5 minutes. So all the school shootings, all the public shootings over the last 25 years have occurred within 5 minutes, and then it's over. And so it takes police, and the police will tell you this, about 5 minutes average in order to get into a building, get into a building and engage. Nationally, that's the average. The U.S. Secret Service, FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security, as well as all the national law enforcement agencies that represent most law enforcement in the country, now are saying that the traditional lockdown that you and I grew up with and that our students are still practicing is not the way to do things anymore. We cannot keep doing that. It has absolutely been proven that it does not work. And yet, that is the only drill we have right now in our pocket that we use in schools. In fact, in most public places it is. And so we cannot keep doing this. And we know that it's not the answer anymore. We've got to move on. So we have a safety and security committee. We have 15 people on that. We have representation from different stakeholders. Most notably, we have the chief of police, both of our fire chiefs and from North Yarmouth and Cumberland, and we have SRO Amy Owen, who are on those, as well as many of our administrators. We have a representative from the district attorney's office. We have some staff members on there. We have a couple board members on there. And so that group meets every month, and we talk about all these things. ALICE actually came out of one of those meetings and those discussions, I want to say almost 3 years now. I said 2 years, but I was starting to think about COVID, and then I got weepy and said, no, I'm moving on. I'm not going to talk about that. ALICE is a multi-option approach. It is not a single option. So the traditional lockdown that we now use in schools that we all grew up with is a single option approach. We're going to be talking about a multi-option approach. We sent initially, the police department And Cumberland sent some officers to this training as part of the safety committee's recommendation that we send a bunch of people. We sent several teachers and administrators in our district to an initial training, 2-day training. And then we came back and said this approach works for us, including an elementary teacher. We wanted to get an elementary teacher's perspective because that was where we're most concerned is how would this resonate. And that teacher came back as well as an elementary administrator that we sent, 2 elementary administrators, to see how this would resonate. And they all came back and said this is the approach we need to use. In February of this year, the board took the safety committee's recommendation to move ahead with Alice for this beginning of this school year. So it is part of a purchase program through Navigate 360. You do have to train all of your staff first. That is your first step before you can do anything else. And so that was the first thing that we did, is we trained 400 staff, which is 95% of our regular staff in our district, and we'll be training the remaining 5% within the next 4 to 6 weeks. We have an additional training for those that have come on since we started school. I just want to also briefly talk about, and many of you have probably seen this before, Alice is just one of many protective measures. We have many protective measures in our district, and these are some of them. We have a mental health services and programs that I think rival probably many districts in the state. We have 14 social workers and counselors alone. Plus, we have a mental health specialist and a PhD level psychologist who works full-time in our district. Plus, we have a BCBA, which is a behavioral analyst who helps us manage some behavioral issues in our district. We have a safety and security committee. We have emergency plans at both the district level and at the school level. The district level emergency plan is being revamped by the safety and security committee, and actually it will be far more user-friendly when it's done. It's an internal document, so it is used by people that absolutely need to use it. And our first responders are very much part of that, developing that plan. We have a full-time officer, Officer Owen, who is on campus every day, every single day of the school year. We have locked facilities, as most of you know, and we have remote building access, so we can actually remote lock all of the doors in this on this campus with one switch, just one button. Everything's locked. We also have double entry door vestibule security. I should say that's in progress. It's not done. We just started doing this 2 weeks ago, and we're about to finish it. We have locked doors on the outside of the building. We're now going to be locking the interior vestibule doors as well. So when people come in, we have a new procedure for all of our buildings. A visitor comes in, they're going to actually stop in the vestibule. There'll be a sliding window from the office. People have to sign in now before they can even get through the next set of doors. And that's actually pretty standard protocol now in schools, and it's something that was recommended to us by Homeland Security. We had an audit by Homeland Security that was conducted by the representative in Maine here, and he works for the School Protective Division. Homeland Security now has different branches and divisions, and we worked with the School Protective Division. One of the things that came out of that assessment also was that we had vulnerable spots in our district where a vehicle could come through certain parts of glass or doors, and we made sure this summer that we filled those areas in that were recommended. So you might see different deterrents around the campus that you've never seen before, such as planters or something that's concrete. I won't say exactly where everything is, but there's different things that are blocking glass that we have for that reason. And we also have been increasing our surveillance inside and outside the campus. We haven't covered all of it, and we certainly can't cover all of it, and we won't. There's certain areas, obviously, we would never cover, but we're trying to improve our surveillance cameras so that we can go back and look at things that have happened on campus, especially outside. We seem to have issues when school's not in session on occasion. We also have silent alarms in multiple areas of the campus and strategic areas where we know there's always staff, so that in the event of an emergency, the silent alarm actually can be engaged quickly, kind of like on a bank, and it goes right to dispatch, so that the police would immediately know that there's a problem. And we also have an emergency mass notification tool that we can get a word out to literally everybody connected to the school community within a couple of minutes. And in progress, this is something that we just started working on. Well, I shouldn't say we just started working on it. We started working on it a few months ago to get on the list because it's so popular in this country right now. And it is a free service, but the Sandy Hook Promise has an anonymous reporting app and button that you can put on your website. And we finally made it to the top of the list. And now we are working with the Sandy Hook Promise to get that into place by the new year, 2023. So we'll have that going. We have a group that's working on that. And again, most of these things came out of our safety committee. So our safety and security committee, I really give huge kudos to that group for managing all this over the years and being part of that. So I'm going to ask Officer Owen to come up, who is a school resource officer. She's going to speak, and then we'll have our administrators talk about the age-appropriate at each school way we're going to roll this out with students. We'll have questions and answers, and then we'll go from there.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Amy Owen, I'm the school resource officer, and I know that Jeff has put out a lot of information about this program, but we figured that just an overview of what it is would be helpful. Please know that this presentation is not what we're presenting to students. This is made specifically for this audience, for you parents and people within the community. So ALICE is a national program, and it's based on a multi-option approach to a violent critical incident. And what we've learned from research is that people need to be empowered to have choices in these incidents, and they can't just be made to wait for help. As a part of that research, we have a statistical average, a national statistical average, for the amount of time that it takes between these incidents starting and police arriving on scene. And that's just in the parking lot, and that's between 5 and 6 minutes. So in that 5 and 6 minute period of time, we want to empower people with tools to keep them safe before police arrive, because statistically these events are ending when police do arrive. So ALICE breaks down, the acronym ALICE itself is really broken down into two separate components. The first component is the idea of situational awareness and communication, and then the second component are the 3 response options that we have. So when we talk about situational awareness, we're just talking about your awareness and your alertness to your environment. We have a broad spectrum of that. So we have people on one end of the spectrum who are, we've all seen walking down the street, looking at their phone, oblivious to the pedestrian traffic in front of them or anything that's going on around them. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have people who are completely overwhelmed with fear and unable to respond. And so what we want to do is we want people to operate in that mid-zone where you're aware of your surroundings, you're not in fear, but you're just taking note of what's going on around you, so that if you see something that's unusual or that might be a safety risk, that you feel empowered to say something or recognize that there might be something happening that people need to be aware of. So alert is the A in ALICE, and alert is simply that first awareness that there's danger. This can be either through a text message, through your senses if you hear a loud noise. This is just that initial awareness that something's wrong, and it gives us a cue to recognize that we need to respond and make a decision about how we're going to respond. The I in ALICE is for information. With ALICE, we're no longer using code words. What we've found with code words is that it doesn't give people, it doesn't give everyone the information that they need in order to make a decision that is going to keep them safe. So when we use a code word in other examples, we've seen that maybe some people, maybe at the administrative level, we know what those code words are, or staff know what those code words are, but we need to empower people to know that if there's a danger in one area of the building, and people are able to get out in a completely separate area of the building, that they're able to make that choice. So that's what we're really empowering people with the information piece. Now, these will be the 3 response options. The first and the preferred option that we have is to evacuate. What we've found in these situations is that your safest option, your best option is to get out if you're able to get out. And so what we are teaching with this program is we're really giving people permission to leave the building if there's a violent incident. We're no longer requiring that they stay huddled in a corner and remain in the building, knowing full well that they have an opportunity, they have the time and the distance to get out. And when we talk about getting out, we're talking about getting to safety first. That's our primary concern. So we get to a safe place, and then we can talk about getting to a rally point, and then ultimately we can talk about getting to a reunification point. But one of the quotes that we use in the training is that we don't have any missing children from any of these events. Nobody's still missing from any of these events. They've all been located. So if we have a student who decides to run to grandma's house or go somewhere else within the community, nobody's still missing. We will find them. We just want them to get to safety. Lockdown is still a component of this program. It just looks a little bit different now. So lockdown is not simply locking your door and pulling your shades and getting in the corner. Lockdown is locking your door, pulling your shades, and then barricading that door. So we're teaching staff to recognize whether you have an inward swinging or an outward swinging door, and teaching them tools to be able to barricade those doors based on their mechanics. We're also teaching that students would spread out within the room, that they would stay on their feet and ready to move, and that they'd be considering other options, or the teacher would be considering other options. What's the next thing that we can do? Because we're proactive in our response. We're no longer just sitting and waiting. And then we have counter. So counter is the most challenging topic really to talk about and to accept, because this is the worst case scenario. And so these are just some strategies that we can use if we are faced with a worst case scenario. These strategies, I will say, are taught at the 6th grade level and above. 6 through 8 we teach distraction techniques. And 9th through 12th, we teach distraction techniques and control techniques. So the ultimate goal of countering techniques, whether distraction or control, is to interrupt that process of focusing and acquiring the attention that you need in order to hurt somebody. So these techniques are used if you have no other option. There's no option to barricade and there's no option to evacuate. So between the 6 to 8 age groups, we're teaching noise, distance, movement, and distraction. So that we're creating a very chaotic environment in order to disrupt that mental focus process. Then in the 9th through 12th age groups, we are teaching distraction and control techniques, which are hands-on techniques. This is 100% a personal choice, and the reason that we're sharing this information is because statistically, it would be likely at this age group for the intruder to be a peer. So we're not talking about students going up against necessarily somebody, some monstrous figure. Statistically, it's likely that it would be a peer. And the control techniques that we teach are very, very basic, and they use body weight and gravity. And we teach that if you feel empowered to do so, then you are permitted to control the limbs of the intruder if you're close enough to do that, and ultimately the head of the intruder. And this is a group process. Again, it's a personal choice, and it is at the age-appropriate level. It's not happening below the 9th grade. Then I will just talk very quickly about age appropriateness in terms of the ALICE program before administrators talk about specifics within their buildings. So for ALICE, in the K through 3 age group, we're not teaching any counter techniques. Evacuate is very similar to a fire drill. So we're teaching listening to the teacher. Lockdown, same thing. We're teaching listen to the teacher. And the teacher will be the one barricading the door, will be the one potentially bringing furniture over to the door. Students at this level are just taught to spread out and stay on their feet, ready to move if they need to. At the 4-5 level, same thing, we're teaching evacuate. The students at this age level are capable of bringing over furniture to the teacher if they're barricading that door, so they can help with that process. We are not teaching any type of counter techniques. And then 6-8, same thing, teaching evacuate as we would with a fire drill and talking about rally points. Then with lockdown, these students can assist. They're able to bring things over and barricade that door. And then with counter techniques, we're using movement, distance, noise, and distractions, but we're not teaching any hands-on approaches. And then 9 to 12, again, we're teaching the entire program. And that's all I have.
Join us. So Corey Munzey, principal of Mabel Wilson. Most of what I was going to say was actually already captured on Amy's slides, so that is fantastic. At our level, we're planning on incorporating ALICE into sort of just part of our routine safety drills. So we already do fire drills, we already practice an evacuation, and for us it's really just working with our students on ensuring that the biggest thing that they know is that they're safe, and we're going to keep them safe, and to really make sure that they're listening to the teacher, even if the teacher gives them a really weird request to run out of the room really quick or something that we wouldn't normally do. And so I think at the primary level, our biggest focus is really to make sure that our teachers feel empowered, that our teachers know their options, because they're really going to be the ones that are directing the students and what they need to do. And so luckily we were able to, as Jeff said, to start the school year, do a training with our whole staff, and we plan to continue that approach throughout the year, to continue to refine what our teachers need to know. That way they feel super comfortable telling our students what they need to know. We are going to do some activities with students, and the hope is to do those by the end of October. And I think on my slides, I said if ready on the dates, because we're still creating the actual activities and lessons. And part of what we need to do is make sure that we take time as a staff to make sure they feel comfortable rolling it out to the students. So at our level, it's actually more about what we're not going to say than what we are going to say. So when we're talking to students about ALICE, we're not going to be talking about weapons, we're not going to be talking about guns, we're not going to be talking about people coming into our school. It's really in the event of an emergency, similar to a fire or similar. A couple years ago, we had a fox on the playground. There's lots of reasons why our students need to listen to the teachers, and sometimes they're going to ask you to do some weird things. And so as a team, as a school, we are working with one teacher from every grade level to make sure that we have representation from our 4-year-olds up to our 7- and 8-year-olds. And we are working through some, I think they're going to be simple but fun activities to really increase our students' awareness. So we're going to do some things like do a scavenger hunt and go count all the doors in our building. How many different staircases can you find? And we might have like a little map around our school that they have to go, and they'll have pictures there that they have to locate. And so for Mabel Wilson, it's really a sort of soft approach because it really is teacher directed and teacher driven. And so we just want our students to have better awareness as to where all the exits are and some of the options that Amy mentioned. And I guess we'll take questions at the end. So,
hi, I'm Carol MacArthur, principal of 4th and 5th grade. So we have a staff group that has started the planning process to look at what our student trainings will be. One of the things that I think has really become clear in our discussions is that there's a difference between training and drills. So we're really taking sort of a training approach with our students. So our plan for implementation is going to start with Officer Owen and I introducing in the context of safety drills, like Corey talked about, the ALICE program at an assembly in October. And that will be the catalyst for classroom teachers and other staff to be able to talk with their students in smaller groups. We have a lockdown drill planned through the entire middle school on October 24th. So in the time between that assembly and that lockdown drill, we'll be doing some training with students, which is really discussion-based. And then it's always good when we come back from vacations to review routines and expectations, because kids are a little out of practice after they've spent a long weekend or a week or more away from school. So as part of that review of expectations and routines, we'll roll in some revisits of the safety drills at those important junctures. So in terms of, what we'll be doing with students, similar to what Corey said, we'll be introducing ALICE in the context of safety drills. We have fire drills, we have evacuation drills, and now we'll be introducing something new, which would be ALICE. We will be using the full acronym. And one thing that we intend to do is give some everyday examples of, what each letter means. So alert, an everyday example might be that someone gets on the intercom and asks kids to stay off the ice at recess. Or it might be that we are asking everyone in the building to stay where they are, because maybe there's a medical event that's happening in a place in the building, and we want to reduce traffic to, provide some privacy and dignity for whomever is involved. So those are everyday examples that the students would be familiar with, so we can use that as part of our context. And as it relates to the counter strategy, because we're not directly teaching that, but it is part of the acronym, we would be letting our students know that our teachers are trained to implement that strategy, and that, as Corey was saying, it's really important that students listen to their teacher for directions. The planning group that we have, small group of staff that represents a variety of roles within our school, is going to be working on scripts, discussion prompts, and resources that the classroom teachers can use in their classroom. And we have a community meeting time every day and as part of our regular schedule, so it's a built-in structure where these conversations can happen. And the language that we've decided to use with our students is unexpected. We use this when we talk about, expected behaviors versus unexpected behaviors. And so we're going to use that unexpected as our way of talking about how a situation might arise and what they might need to be responding to. So as it relates to unexpected, we would say, your teacher might ask you to do something unexpected. They might ask you to leave the classroom in a hurry. They might ask you to go out a different exit door than you typically do. They might ask you to move tables or desks around in the classroom. Those are unexpected requests from your teacher, but in the event of something, revolved around safety, you need to follow your teacher's directions. And so that's how we plan to sort of, keep the conversation less scary for students. And I think I covered everything, so I'll turn it over to Marie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mari Trebilcock, 6-8 principal. I think you'll notice a theme of sort of becoming a little bit incrementally more transparent with students as they get older and are able to handle more information. So our time frame, we're spending time similar to what Carol described, collaboratively planning with a team of teachers, counselors, administrators, our instructional plan for students so that they all have a common message. And that's happening on September 27th and then rolling out to our teachers on October 7th. We'll provide a grade level overview. Amy Owen will be there with Jason LaRiviere and I, and we'll do that as grade levels. We frequently meet with grade levels or teams of students, and so that's a norm for us to interact with our students in that size grouping. So that'll be an overview of what ALICE is and what to expect when we hold our enhanced lockdown drill on October 24th. So in terms of the plan for students, we're obviously collaboratively developing this instructional plan for teachers to use in their advisories. And then we're going to meet with the grade level students to give the overview, go over what is it, what should they expect, and what the common message is for our goals and objectives during that time, so that students aren't surprised when they go to their advisory and have this enhanced lockdown drill. And we'll do that in advisories. The students will go to their advisories first, and then we will call this enhanced lockdown, and students will be with their advisor in groups that are small and familiar, and we have norms for talking about lots of different types of topics, some very light and some challenging. And so there'll be common prompts for the teachers to use with the students. It just gives us this time and space to have hopefully a meaningful conversation with the students and to process through what would happen if. We're not going to have the students moving furniture, even though they're old enough to do that. We're not going to have them, engaging in practice drills. We're going to talk about what would happen if. What would you do if this happened? What would you do if that happened? And so it's a discussion-based approach. Following that, we recognize that some students might really have a hard time with such content, and so we're prepared to make sure our counselors and social worker are available to support students as needed. But I think one thing that has been challenging over the years of doing traditional lockdowns with students is that in those lockdowns, our middle schoolers are not dumb. Right? And so they ask really hard questions that have been difficult to answer. And so this idea of giving them options, I think, will be refreshing to many students because it's more honest. So that's really the middle school approach, and I'll pass it off to, is it Carl who's going? I didn't know which one of you was talking.
It's going to be a team effort. Hi, everybody. Carl Francis, principal at Greeley High School. I've been in education a while now, and going through the traditional strategies that, I've done it for many, many years, and I've always questioned really how effective those strategies might be. And I could tell you, after going through this training in August, I feel empowered, I feel prepared, and I've never really felt that way before. So I think it's a very positive thing, and I appreciate the district making the effort and the Cumberland Police Department's efforts to make this happen. So I am going to introduce to you Mr. Don Gray, our assistant principal. His background and experience and skill set makes it perfect for him to lead this charge at Greeley High School. He's been organizing this for us alongside of Amy, and I would like him to talk through the specifics for you.
Thank you. So at the high school, I guess I would say, unfortunately, our kids are really aware of, probably why we're introducing Alice. And so our approach is going to be, we had a team of about 14 educators, counselors, social workers, our SRO and administrators meet earlier this week to develop a plan. Our plan, our initial rollout is going to be the 14 of us. We're going to break each advisory grade level down into groups and present so we have a consistent message. So what will happen is we've kind of worked through where we're going to do juniors, I think, first, then seniors, and work our way down to freshmen. We're going to start that the week of October 3rd. And we're going to use advisory and range of support time to do that. But the overview is going to be, it's going to start with an introduction, and one of our English teachers, Mr. Bobby Livingston, wrote a wonderful intro for us, which really kind of sets the stage and I think helps our kids or puts them in a place of a little bit more comfort in talking about this. So we're going to start with that. Then we'll talk about, much like Mari talked about, we will have our counselors, our social workers on board. We'll inform of our students of where they can, connect with those folks if they find that they're uncomfortable or have a little anxiety about the topic. Working down through, we'll then go over those components. The communication, we'll go right through Alice and what that acronym is, why we don't use the old response, and why this approach it's an action, options-based approach that empowers them. We care about them, and we want to empower them to survive any type of incident where they would need to employ the use of Alice. Again, our approach to them will also be talking about, look, we prepare for fires now. The likelihood of a fire happening is not high, but we still prepare for that, and we talk about it and make a plan for what we're going to do at school as well as at home. And so like that, we want to make sure that we're prepared for any scenario where we might have an active intruder and have to respond. So that will be our approach. We'll talk about each of those response options and give a couple of examples. And then we'll really just take some questions that first. It'll just be a conversation, that initial rollout. The plan next is to, over the course of this year, 3 or 4 more times, we'll discuss with kids, our students, each of those response options in more detail. So, what does an enhanced lockdown look like? What are the things that we can do? And we probably will actually have them move a little bit of stuff around. We won't totally dismantle a classroom, but just so that they have the opportunity to go through that process. And then we'll spend one of those advisory times talking about an evacuation. What would make you choose to evacuate? And how could you do it, like if you're on the second story? What are all the options? So we'll cover all of those in more detail. And then the counter, that will probably be mostly a discussion about the types of things that they could do. And it's about distraction, it's about control. We'll talk about, you can, noise. Noise is a distraction. We'll talk about, what other things can be a distraction, like if something is kind of coming at you from the side, if it's an eraser or something that kind of takes your focus off maybe what you're focusing on. So we'll talk about all those different things with our students. And then in the end, we will likely do a tabletop scenario where we'll present them with something, and then they can talk through, what options they might use and what might work best. And so that's will be our approach to roll out Alice. Again, the reason we're taking a little bit longer is it can be a little overwhelming. And so if we try to present everything in detail to start, number one, that it probably won't all sink in at once, and so we want to give them time to reflect, think about what we're saying, and be comfortable with the topic. So let's see. Yeah. So I think I've covered what our plan is. So I'll turn it back over to Mr. Porter.
All right, thank you to our school administrators for hopefully giving you enough information, and we'll take some questions in just a moment. A couple more things. I should have said that all of our staff were trained for 4.5 hours. So we have those 3 staff days before school begins, and we had 4.5 hours of training for every staff member. So that included 3 different components where they were doing some online training, they were doing in-person training. I'd like to thank, again, the Cumberland Police Department. We also had an officer from the Yarmouth Police Department helping, but we had, I think, 6 officers at the most, and then we had, on different days, 27 groups of staff were trained. and each group had around 15 people in them for the hands-on part, so it was pretty extensive. The other piece is there's a built-in every 90 days recurring training for staff. It's a 5-minute online training, and it basically reminds staff and just kind of keeps it right there as to the basics of Alice and how to use it. Is it a foolproof thing? No. Is it going to help? I think it is. It's definitely better than traditional lockdown, and it gives people options. And again, it can be used in any public place that you are. I have older children, and I have talked to them about the Alice approach and what they can do, because they're often not around us, my wife and I. And so what are they going to do when they're in college? What do they do when they're in the supermarket or they're driving or whatever, wherever they are? What can they do, and what are their options? And I think if older children, it's worth talking to them about this more. There's more information that we have on our website if you'd like to learn more about Alice. If you go to our website, it's under Safety and Security Committee, and then there's a link, and this information's gone out before, but we'll be sending it out once again with this recording. There's a link that goes to an Alice, it's kind of a brief tutorial for members of families of our students, and you can go through that tutorial, and it will give you a pretty good idea about the components of Alice. You can watch it, with older children, you might want to watch it. I would preview it first before you watch it with your children, just to make sure it's appropriate for your family. But just to kind of give you that information. So, Chief, do you have anything else you want to add before we go into questions and answers? And I think the questions and answers will probably be a group effort. So we'll probably, give them all to Chief, and then Chief can farm them out here. But
I think that was a setup. So for those of you that I haven't met, my name's Chip Munzey. I'm your police chief. And I think this has all been very capably covered by Amy and by the school administrator. So I don't have much to say other than how proud I am of Amy from our team for the huge lift it was to roll this out from our side. And so we're a small police department. We have 12 full-time sworn staff. We're at 11 right now, and then 1 reserve. So there's a total of 12 of us, and we got 5 of us trained as instructors. So I hope that gives you an idea of the importance of this program to me and to the department, that many of us wanted to step up and help be a part of this. I'm also a dad. I have two sons. My youngest is now 22, but I can tell you that I've known for a very long time that traditional lockdowns don't work. And so I was telling my kids years ago, if something happens in your school, get out of the school, run to the tree line, I will come and find you. Don't stay in the classroom. So the fact that we are now evolving to a place where not only the national groups, the federal groups, everybody that's got a 3-letter initial, whether it's the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Education, are endorsing a multi-system approach, I feel like, finally we're getting there. And I can't tell you how empowering it was to be part of this training process and going into the room with these groups of teachers that came in very anxious and very concerned and then left telling us that they felt empowered, that they felt prepared. Like, it was one of the most gratifying experiences of my 27-year law enforcement career. So I think it's impossible to overstate the importance to me and to us at the police department in this program. And so, what I mentioned when we met with the entire assembly of staff here in this room, it was a pretty packed house. And one of the things I mentioned to them, and I just want to leave you with this because it's been helpful to me over my career, we get to contemplate in my profession a lot of things that are not nice, right? We get to see and hear and be involved in some dark stuff, and we get to prepare for the worst days of our life and the worst days of people's lives that we come to help. And I've always tried to remind myself throughout my career that me preparing for something does not make that thing more likely to happen. Me failing to prepare for something does not make that thing less likely to happen. So I think it's important that we have a plan and have a process and a program, which I think we have, that we educate ourselves, that we train on it, and then we get back to the job of educating students and and know that we're ready if something does occur, but that the fact that we've touched on it, and we've thought about it, and we've prepared it doesn't make it more likely to occur. So I just want to leave you with those words. Again, thank you to everybody. This has been an incredible program to be a part of rolling it out. Very proud of all of us, and Amy in particular. And I feel like I'm standing up here now. So do you want me to ask if there are questions? And are there any questions? And I'm going to try to hand this microphone off as fast as I can if anybody's got one. Yes. Sure. I'm going to answer that question for you, and then I'm going to pass off to somebody that I think can answer the other questions probably better than me. I think no matter what, and that question did come up with some of the educators actually, so it's a great question and it's a reasonable question. But no matter whether a person is aware of the attempts that are going to be made to make their efforts fail, those steps that we may take in the school to barricade, to evacuate, they still will work. So regardless of whether I know, if you're a teacher, regardless of whether I know if I'm an assailant that you have locked down your classroom and you've gone into an enhanced lockdown to barricade a door to make it more difficult for me to get in there, it still makes it more difficult for me to get in there. And a perfect example is that during the hands-on scenario training, I acted as a role player assailant. So I left the room. We made a mock announcement. The teachers inside the room barricaded that classroom, and I had to try to get in and defeat their barricade. And I knew exactly what they were going to do. I knew roughly how long it was going to take them to do it, and I couldn't defeat their barricade because they did what they were trained to do. So, so the short answer is, a lot of this information is out there. Certainly, people know how to use the internet. So whether they've learned it in an advisory at the high school, or whether they've learned it on the internet, if somebody has ill intent, it's possible that they know what we're going to try to do to make their effort fail, and it's still likely to make their effort fail. So hopefully that's helpful and reassuring. And then as far as the way that's going to be rolled out and discussed, you said you have a kindergartner and a fifth grader? Okay.
Yes, so the difference between a traditional lockdown is we would teach the students that the door's locked, the screen is, or the shade is pulled, and everyone goes to a specific location in the classroom together, essentially huddling on the floor. And what Amy had talked about, the research really shows that that you actually are creating an easier target that way. And so enhanced is not necessarily a term we'll use with the students, but for adults, it helps them connect that we're doing a bit of a different approach. Still locking the door, still pulling the shade, but the enhanced aspect of it is that you're barricading the door. Students and staff are spread out throughout the classroom, and that you're on your feet rather than sitting. So those are the enhanced pieces. We actually talked about the fact that in our planning group, that the last time students actually practiced a traditional lockdown because of COVID was 3 years ago. So for our younger kids, they're not necessarily going to have as strong a point of reference. Older students, you could probably make that differentiation. We're in 4th and 5th grade, we're just planning to say, this is what you do when you lock down. Corey gives the thumbs up, so I think MIW is a similar approach. I'll take a stab at the last question, and then I think maybe Amy might be the right person for your first two. We have a policy around search of students' person and property, and so there needs to be a reasonable suspicion. We don't just go through students' bags, lockers, things of that nature, without reasonable cause to do so. Did I do okay? Okay. I know my job.
So to your general question, I think about are there things that the district will consider doing to provide teachers with different response options? You mentioned pepper spray. Ultimately that would be a decision that would be made by the district at the district leadership level. But I can tell you, having carried pepper spray for a long time and having deployed it many times early on in my career, that it's not a cure-all for things. So it's expensive, it's something that you have to train on and remain trained on. There's cross-contamination issues, so that particular tool in an educational setting is not particularly well-suited and not particularly effective. But I will tell you, though, that I understand where your question is coming from, and your question is, can we adequately prepare teachers to respond to a threat in the classroom? And this system is amazing for that. So the enhanced lockdowns, the barricade process is incredibly effective. The counter, which even though at the lower grade levels isn't being taught to students, has been taught to teachers, is incredibly effective. And I can tell you that because, again, I got to play the assailant and go into a classroom in a mock drill to see what sort of damage I could do while these educators countered me. And it is very effective. And I think the educators felt that also. I think that going through that training, they felt like, yeah, that actually can work. And one of them told me at the beginning of this, I didn't think I could do this. I didn't think I could do this training. I wasn't sure if this was the right profession for me anymore. And now I feel like a superhero and I can take care of these kids. And so to hear that is so powerful, and it makes me really a firm believer that. I mentioned at the General Assembly, we can't turn every teacher into a ninja or black belt, and we can't arm every teacher in the school, but we have provided a system that gives multi-options, and one of those is to counter, and it is very effective because of the nature of just human nature and the dynamics of physical confrontation. So I don't know if there was another question in there, but hopefully that's helpful. The teachers do have the ability to evacuate, I think, from every classroom in the building, but I can let Jeff maybe speak to that.
Yeah, part of Alice does actually teach us how to break a window effectively. So during that 4.5 hours, I will tell you, I've never heard how do you effectively break a window. I've never cared about that before, and now I know how to break a window just like that. We didn't actually break a window, but we've saw demonstrations of it and how you can do it. And our staff, I have to say, being I've done this my entire career, education, so you don't think about these things. I never thought about these things. The only thing I thought about was a fire. My gosh, there might be a fire in the building. What do? We get the kids out, fire drill. Ever since I was a teacher, that's the only thing that I really thought about. And then safety was just more lockdown. It was just something going on outside the building. We just got to make sure we're safe. We now know that's not good enough anymore, so we've got to try different things. And so, whatever it is, it teaches you to use whatever is there. It's like when I came in this room, for example, I've been in this room 150 times, 200 times, whatever it's been. I know where all the exits are, not because I've been in here many times, because the first 149 times I never even noticed where the exits were. I know where every exit is ever since this training. That's one of the things that you do get taught, is be aware of your surroundings. When I go into a supermarket now, I now check, where could I get out of this supermarket quickly? A movie theater, where do I get out of this movie theater quickly? They gave a really good example right here in Maine, where there was an armed intruder in a supermarket. There were a lot of customers in there. The customers were all trying to get out the front doors of the store while the armed intruder was there with a gun, holding a gun up, right here in Maine in a supermarket. And there were about 10% of the people in the store ran to other parts of the store and exited the building from the other parts of the store. So I think it's just, part of it is just being aware and not doing what you think almost acting counterintuitively to what we've always been taught to do if you need to do it, and not always just doing the right thing. The other thing I just wanted to answer about the K through 3, some people might think, my gosh, if you're a teacher of little ones, little 7, 8-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds, how can you do this by yourself? So we tested that. I was in several staff groups, and we decided that most of us, except for 2 people in the room, were going to be students. So we all stood around, and the 2 people who were teachers, who decided to be the teachers in this scenario, they were able to barricade that room effectively within less than 2 minutes. They were able to get it done, just the 2 people. They were dragging the tables. The rest of us who were being students, because we were too young, we weren't doing anything. We were just watching, and we were taking directions, and that was it. We weren't participating. So you can do it very quickly, and it is amazing how effective you can barricade a door, and you got to know which kind of door you got. And you have to know, and I think the MACE question is a great question, but what Alice really teaches you is use what you've already got. Use what's on you right now, whether it's deflection or whatnot. You might not be able to get to that MACE. We have a laundry list of things right now, and I probably shouldn't have said laundry list. We have a list of things that have been requested to the safety committee, and we're reviewing that. The safety committee just started reviewing all those requests from staff. Some of them we're probably going to go ahead with because they make sense, and this is the whole committee talking about, do these make sense? And then some of the requests we're not going to, probably at least half of them we're not going to do because it's not going to make sense in the moment. And so we'll have those things that we'll be giving for feedback. So I don't know if we've answered your questions, but other questions? Yes, for the chief.
So we actually the portables was definitely on our mind this summer, and as we were planning this, and that's part of sort of what Jeff was mentioning, that we had staff who work in the portables, train in the portables, and train in their room, in their environment that way, because there are some unique challenges and just differences between being in a portable, and there are some pros as well. If something is going on in the building, they're already sort of in a safer location. So we have reviewed our procedures and practices, and we made sure all the doors lock, and we have made sure that we're using our badges appropriately so we can track those things. And so the staff, again, they practice in their rooms with things that are there, and I think they feel. I think going into the training, I would say our portable staff were probably some of the most apprehensive and nervous of the teachers at our building anyway, and I think leaving the training, they were probably some of the most comfortable and confident in the approach.
Other questions? Sir. I'm going to say the answer to that question is yes. I think that those are decisions that are made by town council and school boards about effective use of resources. And so I think the short answer is yeah. I think that's just it's a monetary decision. So hypothetically, it would be a joint decision and conversation, I believe, and Jeff can disagree if I'm off base, because basically, the cost of an employee, a full-time equivalent employee, would be borne partially by the school district and partially by the town because of the nature of the school year. Part of the year, Amy's with us, and then part of the year, most of the year, Amy's here at the school helping out. So it would be a joint conversation between both groups. We've been having some, I think, very preliminary discussions, fair to say, about what the sort of SRO cadre should look like moving forward, including the potential of a new school building being built and the potential that that building is going to actually be in North Yarmouth and so off this campus. And so ongoing, we recently applied for a grant through the federal government called the COPS grant to see if we would be able to get funding for another school resource officer. And so that grant application is in and pending their decision. So I think that is on people's radar for discussion.
I just wanted to add that, so with the new school in North Yarmouth, that is definitely part of our preliminary operations plan, is to have an SRO at that. Of course, this all has to go through an approval and a budget if the school gets approved in November. But our plan, my plan is to have a full-time SRO at that school alone because it's off campus. And I don't want to speak for the chief, but I know that in the past, and we've talked as well recently, North Yarmouth Memorial School, when it was open, the Cumberland Police Department was the actual response agency, first responders. And we had an MOU with the police department here and not the sheriff's department because they would be much quicker to get over there. And so that a similar arrangement we're hoping is going to be in place. And I know the chief is very supportive.
Thank you. I wasn't referring to the reactionary time of the SRO. I'm talking about the value of officer presence, of evergreen officer presence is a hugely impactful opportunity, which is the very first step of law enforcement. So it's not about reaction time, it's about just having someone there so any potential intruder knows there is an officer there. At our current situation, she is in one building and that intruder may know she's not getting there for 8 minutes. We hear 5 minutes. That seems really quick to me. So my second question is, think reaction right now. You're in, our SOR is at the furthest upstairs building or wherever on this campus. There is an active scenario at one of the furthest away schools on the same campus. What is that? I know this is kind of trading towards strategy and things you may not be able to share, but what's that look and feel like? What is the SRO's response? What is your response? 5 minutes down the road, is it a car here with one person jumping out? Is it a team? We all just witnessed Uvalde and the response was shameful. So what does the response truly feel like here?
So great question, and I think the national average that was cited was 5 to 6 minutes, but I was talking with Superintendent Porter recently because as we did the Alice training, the news media became aware that the training was going on, and I finished up training for the day, went back to the police department, and had just walked in the office to catch up on some emails, and Jeff called and said, there's a camera crew here, and they're doing a news story. Can you come up and meet with me to talk with them? And I said, sure thing. And I walked out of the building, saw my town manager on the way by. I said, going up to meet with the superintendent so we can talk to the news media about Alice, jumped in my car and drove up here with no lights, no siren, and was probably here in 2 minutes. We are fortunate that our police department is located very close to the school campus. We're fortunate that your chief and the entire police department consider this school campus, when school is in session, to be the most important part of the community, and we give it a lot of attention. And that during the day, I work during the business day, which coincides with the school day. And when we're full staffed, we have a detective, we have a second in command of the police station, we have a patrol officer that's on duty working the road. And so our response, I'm going to charitably say, is going to be much faster than the national average. So I think that was part of your question. The other part of your question is, what does our response look like when we arrive on campus? And I came to the school board, I don't know, time flies, maybe it was a month ago or 2 months ago, to present to the school board a letter signed by every member of this police department that basically said, we understand that if there's a critical incident here, we're going to go into the school at the risk of our own lives, because we are parents, because we are committed to the safety of the children of this district. So the model for patrol response to a critical incident like an active shooter at a school is that every single officer enters the school upon arrival. Used to be, I knew it was the dumbest thing ever. When I was part of the exercise as a patrol officer, patrol would come and secure a perimeter and call a TAC team, and a SWAT team would go into the school with all of their special SWAT team equipment to try to neutralize an active threat. And then it changed post-Columbine, and it has evolved again, and now it is every single officer enters in, moves directly to the threat to try to stop the active assailant from doing what they're doing. And so we're equipped with the tools, the training, and the drive and motivation to get that done.
Last question, if I may. Slightly different topic. Again, don't know what can be said because it kind of is about privacy and whatnot. But when you think about things that happen in school for millennia, bullying, fights, bringing something to school that's not allowed in school, where we are in today's society, this charged environment we're in, when one of those events happen, does that trigger a broader, I'll use the term lightly, investigation? Do we look at their social media? Like all these shooters that we hear about in the news, we know that there was posts on social media, friends could have sworn, well, I knew this was going to happen. Does that, an event like bullying, or bringing something to school, or a simple fight in the schoolyard trigger a mental health assessment or a risk assessment for that individual, interviewing peers, interviewing parents, looking at social media?
So I think the short answer to that question is yes, and I think the title of it on the school side is called a behavioral threat assessment, so that when there is an incident that occurs, that there's a whole process. A team assembles and looks at this student and not only what happened, but what caused it to happen, what were the pre-incident indicators and supports, and I'm just out of my depth because that's about the most that I know about it, but I know that a number of the folks here are trained in behavioral threat assessment, and that happens when an incident occurs on campus. For us, as far as a criminal investigation goes, the answer is yes. If it arises to the level of a crime that we're investigating, we would look at all of those things. And so I think your thrust of your question, and I'm not trying to make assumptions, but I believe that the thrust of your question is, what are we doing before a critical incident to prevent a critical incident from happening? And so I think behavioral threat assessment is a huge part of it. Aggressive, and I mean professionally and legally appropriately aggressive criminal investigations when an incident occurs, and I would point toward a threat that was made against the campus last year that we tracked to out of state and got a person charged from out of state that made a threat against the school. One from, again, time flies, last spring that was initially reported to us from an anonymous social media app that was tracked down to a person who was charged over in Falmouth with making a threat against the school. So we do those things, and then we're doing the things that are sort of create sort of a sphere of safety around the school with the Sandy Hook, the Sandy Hook Promise app. And I think that is a big piece of it, providing students the ability to anonymously report information that they know, because we know that there's a culture out there about not tattling on a peer, but that students also care, and students are aware, and students have a heightened sense of concern about these sorts of things, and giving them the ability to say, hey, I'm worried about my friend or a peer in my class that's saying some things that I know they're planning something or whatever the case might be. And that has this very robust reporting mechanism behind it. There are screeners at the organization that screen out frivolous things, and then when there are threats or information that's received that does require follow-up, it ges routed to different levels of the school administration, different levels of the police department, depending on the nature of the threat. So I think that between behavioral threat assessment, aggressive and appropriate criminal investigation, the sort of creating an environment where we know that when you see something, you know something, you need to say something, which I think is a huge part of this reporting app. I think we're getting there. I think we're getting there.
I'll just add that we have a mental health specialist that just does that kind of work. Really, we want the person to do other things too. We've got other things, but we've really primarily had this person doing risk assessments. So anytime there's a situation where there's a student that we're concerned about in any way, there'll be some sort of a low-level risk assessment that starts with a counselor, social worker, or whatever. but then we have a person that does it more in depth. If there needs to be more in depth, and we have many of those that are done each year just to make sure that there's something. We always get parent permission before we do that, so parents are fully aware that we're involved in that. But that risk assessment will let us know if it's a low or medium or a high risk situation, and if there are other steps that need to be taken. So that person is dedicated to just that work. And our social workers and counselors kind of do the screening piece. This person takes it to the deeper level. So we're very fortunate. In fact, I think we might be the only district in Maine right now that has a person that just does this work in our district. So we're very fortunate. Any other questions? Yes.
I just want to thank you all for your work on this and for being here this evening. I think many of the questions that I came with have been answered, just in terms of dealing with mental health impacts, that kind of thing. How students challenging questions of why they're doing this, how those will be answered, and then I think how we as parents can talk with our kids in ways that are consistent with what's happening here in the schools. And so I guess just one ask that I would have is that communication, like doesn't have to be a forum like this evening, but just that communication continues as you all are seeing how things are rolling out and what's coming up, so that again we as parents can continue to have those conversations in ways that are consistent. And you did see the gun locks out on the table as well. Chief Munzey, thank you for bringing those. And I know that we're not a huge crowd here tonight, so I hope that those will continue to be made available to people who like to make sure that their firearms are safely secured.
They certainly will. We'll look for some additional opportunities to push those out to the community. I know this forum is being recorded and is going to be broadcast. And so the great thing about our police department is that just because somebody's not here tonight doesn't mean they couldn't get together with me to get a gun lock or 5, or talk to me about safe storage of firearms or disposal of unwanted ammunition or proper and safe disposal of firearms that might be in the home. I can do that with anybody at any time. And so we will look for other proactive ways to get that information and those resources out, but anybody in the town of Cumberland can reach out to me at any time, and I will make arrangements to meet with them to help them out in any way that I can. So thank you for your kind words.
I just want to say thank you for coming. I think the best thing, oh, Leanne, you have a question? The best thing about our approach here in Cumberland, and I think this really works well, is that we have a really tight connection with the police department and the fire department. We have the safety committee. Our school administrators are very involved in all of these processes as well. So it's not like we're kind of operating on an island. We meet, I see the chief all the time. We meet monthly with the safety committee as well as other times, and there's a lot of communication between the SRO, Officer Owen, and the administrators pretty much daily. And so we have a lot of that communication. Leanne?
I was going to also echo the thank yous for bringing this forward to our community, and I really like the feedback that you've gotten from the teachers and the feeling of empowerment. I think that's really important. And the other aspect that I really liked was the fact that I think especially for the older kids probably in the training, that it really applies to other public places to really think through different situations, and I think that's really important. I did have one question. What happens with students who are absent the day of their particular training?
I'll let one of the administrators answer that one if they would like to take it. Marie.
So it's not a one and done. There are multiple iterations of sort of going through this with kids. So if they're not here today, they're going to be here on another day, and we'll make sure that they're part of those reviews. Because, just like with fire drills, you probably remember from your childhood what to do in a fire drill, right? And so you have muscle memory from that, and it comes from the practice. So we'll do the same thing with these drills over time so that they build that muscle memory.
And then our staff is having that 90-day review, and then we've got all these things on a schedule, which is really important. You can't just do this and then we're done. That's a really important part of Alice is they've drilled it into us from Navigate 360. You put things on a schedule. So do you have any other questions, Leanne? Or yes, sir.
Just a couple real quick. My daughter's in first grade, so I had a couple of questions for Rory. Let's see. And then I'll try to ask them all as you guys go. So it sounds like the teachers wouldn't be the only person to
Yeah, so those are great questions. First, I do also want to get back to your point that at Mabel Wilson, anyway, before we roll this out to students, we will be communicating with families again to give you sort of a heads up as to this is what the plan is, this is when it's going to happen. So you will have some additional communication prior to that. So when your kids come home, you'll have a little bit of a heads up as to what was talked about prior to. In terms of the book, for the second question, we actually have a copy of the book, and I think Amy and I reviewed it along with some, as Jeff mentioned, one of our other teachers was part of the initial training. I don't think it's really developmentally appropriate for our school. There's a lot of words on the pages, and it's a lot of heavy content, and we were consulting with another school district who has already rolled this out in Maine, and they were talking about how they rolled it out to their elementary school, and they were using the book, and they said they actually ended up, and they felt really guilty about this as a school, but they ended up crossing off most of the words in the book anyway, because it didn't even, like, our kindergartners are still learning their letters, and so we've decided at Mabel Wilson not to use the book, but we do have a copy of it, and I'm happy to let you see it at any point. I think as students get older, it might be a little more appropriate, but I think that's sort of up for Carol and others to decide. But we do have a copy of it. We looked at it, and we're choosing not to use it. And then you had a first question that I cannot remember. Can you say it again, please?
Was it just about the phrasing and the teaching?
The training, is it one-on-one just the teacher, or are there going to be officers involved too? And then also about the language used for elementary school, like does it, are you explicit about threats, or is it sort of general nature?
Yeah, so our training, we've already trained our staff as we started the school year, and as we have drills throughout the year, we are required to do a lockdown drill, and students will be participating in that. And as Carol said, the biggest difference is instead of having all of our students sort of huddled in a corner, we'll just teach them to sort of scout around the room and just be listening and really to follow the teacher's direction. So we will not be, like I said, talking about scary people or people in our building or some of the language that older students will be able to access and understand and use. Our number, almost every student I talk to, the first thing I tell them is my number one job is to keep you safe. And I think that's the language and the lens that we're going to continue to use with our students. There's lots of situations that may happen, whether it's a fire, a fox, or many of the other situations, and we're going to do all sorts of different things as a school to keep you safe. And so we won't be getting into a lot of the scary language. We will be using the term Alice, but we're not really going to break it down for them and go through the acronym. But we do think it's important that, especially as our third graders transition to fourth grade, that there's a nice transition between buildings, and similar, I'm sure, as our fifth graders transition to sixth grade and so on. Any other questions since I have the mic now? No, we will not be using that language. I think we believe that would just really scare our kids. And that's, again, why at Mabel Wilson, it's really teacher-centered and teacher-driven. And our job is to sort of really help the kids know what they need to do. But we will not be using the language over someone in our building or something scary at all.
Finally, you get up here.
Thought I skated out of this. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's been the most rewarding part of being here in this district, and something that I didn't expect to happen. I kind of anticipated, so I started last fall, and I anticipated, you know, really needing to work at getting to know these kids, getting in the classrooms, you know, which is also very important. But what I found was that the culture of this district is that the kids feel very comfortable, because we've had an SRO for so long, that they feel very comfortable coming to the SRO office, interacting with the SRO. And so I've had the joy of building those relationships with students, yes. And this year, what I found is with the planning of this program, there are a lot of meetings, and there is a lot of time that does need to be dedicated to that. But I've also learned that it's important to get in my calendar times where I'm going into the classrooms, I'm meeting with smaller groups, getting to lunches, you know, welcoming kids when they get off the bus in the morning, and yeah, just the benefit of having those individual connections with students who I'm either called to work with and build a relationship and continue a relationship with those students, and the kids that just flock to the SRO office, which is great. Thank you.
I'm mindful of time, and I don't want to cut anyone off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of close up. And if you have a question that you still like to ask, I know that Chief and I will be around, and I think Officer Owen will be around. I'll let our administrators go because they've got to get up and get your kids' school running tomorrow. And sometimes we don't always have as many staff or substitutes as we need, so they need to do that. So I'll let them go. But if you have any questions, please come on down, and we're going to talk. We're going to turn the recording off at this point. And if you have any questions, we'll be here to answer them. Okay? Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.